The iPhone 6s in 2023. How is it and is it still worth it? Let's get into it. The iPhone 6s came out in 2015 and has honestly been one of the most powerful phones and the most optimistic phones Apple ever released. This phone was insane. The A9 chip lasted all the way up to iOS 6. It came out with iOS 9. That is absolutely crazy and is the longest supported iPhone of all time. Now, I personally think that supporting it for that long was just Apple trying to flex, because it did get to a point where it just could not handle it anymore. The phone would get way too hot and it's honestly just kind of useless now. Like, it's not bad, but it just gets really hot, the battery drains really quickly and apps just do not open as quick as they used to. Now obviously they're not going to. This phone was, way ahead of its time. Like, when you look back at the phones that came out, not in terms of design, the glass backs and all this, but in terms of chipset, these Samsungs, OnePlus could not compete with Apple's chips. And it is insane to me how powerful this phone was. Apple must have seen something really special in this A9 chip to put it in that phone, because I'm telling you right now, that is the most powerful chip we will get in an iPhone that will last for years. Now you may be asking why, and you're saying that as a really big statement to make, but it's really not. This chip was ridiculously overpowered for its time, and Apple will never do that again. They will never put a chip that is so powerful in an iPhone that it can last for years, because they want you to buy a new one. So that is the way it is. But I'd definitely say in 2023, if you are considering buying it, just don't. It's not supported anymore and it is really difficult. But instead of making this a do you buy it, we're going to go over it and we're going to see how it is in 2023, see if it's good to use. So the iPhone 6s, personally my one, struggled from a really weird design flaw where the aluminium actually started to just peel away, which is really strange and I've never seen that before. But yeah, this is a long-term issue and it's something that, you definitely do notice. And I reckon for people that have iPhone 6s's, they have probably noticed that this does happen. But look at this screen. No custom lock screen, no nothing. And it is just so classic. I mean, this phone, for me, brings back so many memories. And not to waffle and not to, bring up my childhood, whatever. But this phone is very special to me because it just reminds me of when I got given it and I opened it up and I was like, wow, this thing is to me, it was like the biggest innovation that happened in years. I got this phone when the iPhone 8 came out and I was just ridiculously happy with it. Like, having this phone, this was spec'd to 64 gigabytes of storage, which at the time you could only get 16 gigabytes base storage. So they really did up the game when it comes to storage. And this was ridiculously powerful. I used to have loads of games in it and every morning I'd come in, I'd sit and watch a YouTube video on this phone. And yeah, I mean, this phone was just, for me, I would never get rid of this specific phone because of what it means to me. And I'm sure a lot of people feel like that in some ways, because these were the peak of our childhood in some ways. Like, this phone, this design language was so iconic to our childhood, especially, when I was born. I'm 16 and I just genuinely really like this phone, and I just have a massive soft spot for it. I used it very recently actually. I had a Google Pixel 7 Pro and it cracked, and I just decided, you know what, I'm going to get a new iPhone, which is the phone I'm filming on now, which is the iPhone 14 Pro Max. But for a minimum amount of time, I used this to use iMessage and use FaceTime, and it was just really, really cool to go back and to be able to give this phone just another lease of life. And talking about another lease of life, this phone was used as recently as yesterday. And you may be asking why. Now, my uncle's iPhone SE, which I've just got to make a video about, so do go and check that out. It's up there if you want to go watch it. It kind of broke. So he needed a phone for the meantime. And I thought, you know what a perfect time to get the iPhone 6s out. And it worked for him. Obviously the battery life wasn't great, but it still works. And it's really incredible that this phone still can be used now today. Now, other than nostalgia, this phone isn't a great phone. Like, overall, I would definitely say that, it's ridiculously thin. Like, yeah, this design, chunky borders, top and bottom, scuffed up aluminium back, not a great camera. But what did you expect? It's 2015 Apple were just finding their feet with the camera they were going to use, with what design language they're going to go for, and this design is iconic. No one can deny that. This is, when you think of Apple and you think of, you know, the mid 2010s, you think of this design. There's no other design, and when you think of phones, you think of this. This is an iPhone. This is what an iPhone is. It isn't the phones we have today. It is this phone. And it is just crazy to me that people are still using it. I still see these out in public. And that's the even crazier thing, is you see these out in public, you see people using them, and you just think, wow, these phones are built to last. And as much as people try to say they're not, the chipset is so powerful and so ahead of its time in most iPhones that people just don't feel the need to upgrade anymore. And it is honestly crazy to me that people say, oh, these iPhones aren't made to last. Other than the battery, what really deteriorates in iPhones? The software gets a bit slow, but what do you expect? When you update your PC, what happens? It gets slower. It's the same thing on an iPhone, and these things are built to last. You know, if you go and drop your phone, that's not Apple's fault that you've dropped your phone and your screen's cracked and, you know, your back's cracked. I'm just saying. But in 2023, this phone is mainly good for phone calls and text, and to hand to a kid if they need it and they need to go out and you want to give them a phone so they can use it, so they can contact you. And it is honestly a really good phone for that. If you want to be able to lock it down, make sure your kid's not doing anything stupid on it, yeah, this phone will be absolutely fine. And to be honest, I do think that if you are considering this phone for getting it for a kid, yeah, go right ahead and buy it. You can probably pick these things up for 50 quid. Like, these things are ridiculously cheap. And it is honestly really cool to me that these phones still do get leases of life. I mean, obviously, you can go and get cheaper phones, you can get this phone, but these phones, yeah, they have a really good lease of life. And I honestly do think that in 2023, you should consider buying it. And I really do think that it is difficult for me to say to go out and buy it unless you have the really specific use cases, which I've mentioned. But yeah, let's go over 5 things on the good and the bad, and let's go over them. So the 5 bad things definitely have to be the screen, the battery, the back chipping over time, the camera, and most definitely that clicky home button. But this is just me being really, really nitpicky here and just coming up with things that I can think that someone would notice and would, you know, mention. But yeah, for what, number 1, the screen is LCD, so it's not as bright and it doesn't look as good. The camera in 2023 is really not good. It does 4K 60 FPS video, but photos are really not good. The back chipping, it just makes the phone not look as nice, and honestly it's really a shame for me. The clicky home button just does get a bit annoying after a while and isn't as nice feeling as the haptic button. And the software support is definitely not there anymore. Like, I definitely say that if the software support isn't there, you should 9 out of 10 not go for a phone, because you're not going to be getting the latest security updates and you're not going to be getting the latest apps. But the 5 good things about this phone is it's the iconic design. It still runs relatively well. It's good for getting your child to be able to contact you, phone message you. They don't need anything more. And I would definitely say the thinness of the design is nice and the roundness in your hand. Now, believe it or not, this round design feels so much nicer in your hand compared to something like an iPhone 14 Pro Max that is so sharp, so heavy in your hand, and can't fit in a pocket. The iPhone 6s is small, it fits in your pocket well, and I honestly do have a massive soft spot for it. You can probably tell this video, I've rambled on about things that I loved about this phone and my experiences with it, and that's mainly because they're all true. I really have a soft spot for this phone, and even if this video doesn't do amazingly, I just really like this phone, and I really wanted to make a video on it just so that I could get one last thing that I really enjoyed. But it's been Harry. I'm out. Peace.